Hi, and welcome back to Wounded on Sixes. Today we'll be reviewing the Tau auxiliary units and adding them to the current Tau tier list. I was originally going to release a fully separate tier list for the Tau auxiliary units, but I decided to amend them to the current tier list. Since Tau auxiliaries are obviously good in the Kroot hunting pack and the Auxiliary Cadre, we'll be judging the units both on how good they are in those detachments, but how well they work with the rest of the Codex also. For an auxiliary unit to be considered good in most detachments, it must be good in at least one other detachment besides Auxiliary Cadre and Kroot Hunting Pack. If the unit is only really viable in those two auxiliary related detachments, it'll be put in the decent tier or worse. Let's get started. So first off, we're going to be looking at the Kroot Hounds. So they're a 40-point model that work pretty well in the Kroot Hunting Pack and the Auxiliary Cadre. They're cheap units. They can help get us the guided fire ability very easily in the Auxiliary Cadre, but they also can get advance and charge very easily from either the auxiliary detachment or the Kroot hunting pack detachment because they only have to be within 6 inches of a Kroot infantry model to be able to advance and charge, which is pretty decent. They can get into combat. They don't have the greatest of attacks by any stretch of the imagination, but they could tie up some light infantry and stick around to cause some havoc there. Again, that strategy really only works in the Kroot hunting pack, but you know definitely some viability there. The problem I have with the rest of the detachments is they don't have any OC, so they're not going to be scoring us any action secondaries, pretty much only proximity secondaries, such as behind enemy lines or engage on all fronts, which they certainly could do. They do move 12 inches, so, we could get them up the board. 40 points to get a couple of VP is definitely worth it. But they may not always survive. They don't have a lot of staying power, and although they're 40 points, if they only had one OC, I would say these guys could see a lot of play in many different detachments. Because of that, because they're really only good in Auxiliary Cadre and Kroot Hunting Pack, and really nowhere else in my opinion, I'm going to put them down in a fringe choice in terms of the overall Codex. Next, we have the Kroot Trailshaper. Now, this is the most expensive Kroot character that can join a unit, and it can join the Stalkers and the Carnivores. It has Infiltrate, which is pretty decent. It does have a 9-inch, move around its unit, reactive move for D6, which is okay. It can also pop off the board and come back in from reserves. It's almost a must have in a Kroot hunting pack. Obviously, all of these units are going to be in a Kroot hunting pack. I could maybe see it having some play in the Auxiliary Cadre, just because of that reactive move. Maybe it could get you a little bit closer, although I don't know how much survivability the Kroot that it's going to be leading are going to have through an opponent's then shooting phase and possible charge and attack and melee phase. So it could be difficult to get a lot out of them in terms of other detachments besides the Kroot hunting pack and the auxiliary cadre. Because it's the most expensive, I don't really like the Kroot Trailshaper, and I think I'm gonna put this at a fringe choice as well. Um, it's really good in the Kroot hunting pack. It's got a lot of utility there. It's okay in auxiliary cadre, and in other detachments, I don't foresee me bringing a Kroot unit with a leader unless I have an exact purpose for that unit. So I don't really see it with the Kroot Trailshaper. Next, we have the Kroot Warshaper. Now, this guy's only 50 points, and I actually kind of like the Kroot Warshaper. You get a free CP on the unit. You get to spend a free CP. If you use a CP on the unit, you get it for free. And then once for battle, it can also unbattle shock a Kroot model within 12. So it doesn't actually have to be the model it's leading. It could be any model within 12 inches. Obviously, that's got some great play in the Kroot hunting pack. And it's even got some play in the Auxilary Cadre as well. I mean, I could definitely see either infiltrating with some far stalkers with them to get some early +1 AP, and then be able to use some of the really good Kroot auxiliary stratagems. Use one for free, which would be awesome. And then if I lose a bunch of units, but I'm out in the middle of the board, I can no longer be battle shocked because battle shocks are things that happen in the Tau unit or in the Tau Codex just because we have a 7 leadership. So, sometimes you fail battle shock, and the ability to, have our carnivores still hold the objective is pretty good. And I think that can see utility even in something like Cayune, which is one of the few non-auxiliary detachments that actually has some stratagems that you can use on Kroot units. So I could see it having a little bit of play in a Cayune list. Maybe on some far stalkers or a screening unit of Kroot carnivores. So I'm going to put the Warshaper over in decent. Finally, the last of the Kroot shapers, we have the fleshshaper at 45 points. So, one of the cheapest leaders in the Codex, and it basically has the ability to, while it's leading a unit, give melee weapons in that unit sustained hits, and it can also give a unit a 6-up Feel No Pain. If it already has a 6-up Feel No Pain, it has a 5-up Feel No Pain instead. That's okay. I mean, they're both pretty decent. I don't know how much the sustained hits is going to be great. I mean, I guess it's okay. It's definitely good in the Kroot hunting pack for sure. And it kind of helps Kroot carnivores, especially with the two things that they lack in the most, which is survivability and some damage output. So, in that respect, it can definitely boost those up. And I think that it can make a pretty decent unit. Again, there's not a lot of stratagems in Monka or Retaliation Cadre. Actually, there's none that work for Kroot units if you look. So, you're kind of like, if you're going to bring a leader, you're going to bring them in probably, and not in an auxiliary or Kroot, it's probably going to be in the Cayune. I don't really see me doing that. So to me, the Kroot flesh shaper is probably on a fringe choice. Like I said, in a Kroot hunting pack, sure, all of these guys are coming in a Kroot hunting pack because you have to, or you can bring a couple of them. Like they all kind of work in there, but in terms of like being a must in an auxiliary cadre unit, I mean, again, they could be good, but something tells me you're gonna probably cut your flesh shaper for something better for like a Kroot hound unit that's gonna probably get you more utility in an auxiliary cadre than the flesh shaper is, honestly, because the Kroot hounds can just be awesome giving your Riptide +2 strength all game for CP. So yeah, that's pretty cool. But it's a decent unit. It's fun. I could definitely see fitting it in, but I don't. I think it's a pretty fringe choice in terms of the entire codex. Next up, and not to be outdone, we got the Kroot Lone Spear. 90 points for this guy. Um, this is a pretty decent unit. It's got Lone Op, which is good. Um, Lone Op is great, and it's used to great effect in the Tau Codex. It also has a fire and fade too. It can move up to 6 inches, which is pretty good. After shooting, move up to 6 inches, so it can get out of the way, or it um, can move over to an objective and hold that down if it needs to. Which basically means you can use it to move out, take a shot, and then move back behind cover. That's really cool too. Um, And it also helps other Kroot units. So if you target a unit at range, other Kroot units that attack that same unit get to reroll the hit roll. So definitely a lot of play in a Kroot hunting pack for sure. I mean, this is a must-have there. But I think it's pretty decent in Auxiliary Cadre too. I mean, it has natural lone up, and it can hand out buffs pretty well to your Tau units. And you can also get up there and fight with it. I don't really like it as a sniper. I've said this before. The 3 damage, no devastating wounds snipers, just, I don't know. They're never killing a leader that's really worth it unless you've already put a bunch of damage into one. So, yeah, maybe. It is 36 inches, but I think this could see play in other detachments just because of the lone op. It's only 90 points. It's you could stick it on your natural expansion and just take pot shots at people and fire and fade back and forth behind cover and just do that the whole game. That could be really cool. That could be really effective, and you could put that in basically any single list because it's got the kind of abilities that are almost like stratagems. Like a fire and fade is perfect, and then being able to give hit rerolls to other units in the Codex or other Kroot units in the Codex is also awesome. It's like its own stratagem generator. So you can play this in detachments like Kayun or Monka and get away with it pretty easily because it gives out a bunch of buffs to other units you may be playing. So I'm going to put this in good in most detachments. I think you can play this in a lot of different lists and have success with it. Next, we have the Kroot Farstalkers. And the Farstalkers are pretty cool because they have the infiltrate ability, so you can get this entire unit out into the board. You can stick them with a leader, which is definitely where you want to be. And I think in a Kroot hunting pack, of course, you're going to have some Farstalkers out there with some leaders. But they're not bad. Their weapons are really nothing to write home about. I think they're really good in Auxiliary Cadre because they're a Kroot unit out in the middle of the board that could be getting buffs for your Tau unit. So that's really good. But how good are they outside of that? I guess for the infiltrating ability, they're pretty good. Although I will say you already have a lot of infiltrate in the Tau Codex. You're most likely always going to be bringing stealth suits, so there you have 3 infiltrating units. You're probably going to bring a ghost killer too. Now you have 2 more infiltrating units. It's like, how much do you want to start in the middle of the board? Do you want to give your opponent all those charge targets? Probably not. So in other detachments, you may be less likely to take Far Stalkers. With that said, though, I think like in like a Kayun list with a Warshaper, and being able to throw some free stratagems at it, get it out in the middle of the board, give your opponents something to do with it. You know, in the middle of the game, that could be good. Are you gonna spend the points on it? 85's it's kind of steep, and then you're adding in a war shaper. You're now up another 50 points. It's a pretty expensive infiltrating unit when we already have a bunch. I think it's okay, and I think because you can maybe get it into a Kayun every once in a while, I'm gonna throw them in decent. Just because, yeah, it's not bad. It's definitely good in Auxiliary Cadre, and I think that kind of brings it up a little bit more. That infiltrate ability in Auxiliary Cadre, getting them that much closer to 9 inches from your enemy targets, is kind of bumps them up into the decent category. You can play around with the Far Stalkers. Next up, we have the Crewtalkx Riders, and with the Crewtalkx Riders. The Crewtalkx Riders essentially have everything that the Kroot Hounds don't have. They have 2 OC. It's only one model, but it's 40 points. They have a pretty They have a pretty decent gun. The repeater cannon's not bad. It's a 2 damage weapon. You know how much I love 2 damage weapons. The Crewtalkx Riders can do some damage too. But really, what this unit is great at is like sitting out on an objective or coming in from the board for 40 points and doing action secondaries, which again, scoring is the way you win Warhammer 40Ks in 10th edition. Killing stuff is great. I like picking up my friend's models just as much as the next guy, but scoring points is where it's at. And Crewtalkx Riders can fit in a whole bunch of different lists just because of that ability to be 40 points and a scoring unit wherever you need it to be. With a decent gun. If it needs to fire, it fires. You know, you can get up to 4 shots with its rapid fire. Strength 7, -1, 2 damage. In Auxilary Cadre, you can bump up that AP too, which is pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I think the Crewtalkx Riders are really good, and you can, like I said, a cheap option in a bunch of different lists tells me that they're good in most attachments. I'd recommend bringing them and playing them. If you got an extra 40 points, bring yourself a 40 point, possibly score, 10 victory points in secondaries. Because it could be a unit that's severely ignored when you're doing a bunch of other stuff in the Codex. Next up, we have the Vespid Stingwings. And the Vespid Stingwings are pretty good. 65 points for 5 of them. They have Deep Strike. They can uppy downy. They have a pretty good weapon. It has assault and they move 12. So there's a lot of play there. Like, you could wrap an ingress and then move them and then advance and still shoot. It's a strength 5, -2, 2 damage weapon. Again, 2 damage. This can really mess up somebody's day. I love to use them in all detachments and in all lists because they can come down in your opponent's deployment zone and like shoot off their little their little hold my home objective unit, and now all of a sudden I've taken their home objective. I've maybe burned their home objective. I've captured enemy outposts. Like, I could be, really scoring a lot of points with these guys. They can come in and score points and then bounce off the board to come back down later. And that's just such a great ability. There's so much utility to them. They do have 1 OC, so they can be performing secondaries. They have the movement to be effective. They're not super good in melee, but they can hold their own against some light infantry if they need to. I mean, that's what they're best at. They're really good in Auxilary Cadre, especially dropping them in with some crisis suits behind enemy lines so that your crisis suits are getting the Auxilary Cadre buff. But really, you can fit these guys in any list, and a lot of lists start off with like at least 1 unit of Vespid. And for that reason, I'm going to put them in Windmill Slam. I think they're a great unit. I think people should be playing them in their list. Again, a lot of the ways that I like to use the auxiliary units is as screeners and utility pieces and scoring pieces. They're cheap. If they have OC, they can score me points and they can help win me games. So while my bigger vehicles and crisis suits and battle suits are killing, these guys are dropping in, scoring points, denying my opponent points, and that's what makes them so good. Next up, we have the Crewtalkx Rampagers. And I gotta admit, Crewtalkx Rampagers have been my favorite Kroot model to come out of the new releases. When I saw that Tau were getting a somewhat fast cavalry unit that could like charge and actually do some damage, I was really excited. And obviously, they're good in the hunting pack. They're really good in the auxiliary cadre, especially because you now have an advance and charge stratagem there, so you can really get involved. And if you can continuously like charge, kill a unit, stay not shot at, charge again, kill another unit. Like, these guys can do damage. They can break through your opponent's lines. They do not like to be shot at. They will fold very quickly to dedicated shooting. But if you can keep them moving, if you can kind of keep them behind the scenes and then use them effectively, they can be used in a lot of different lists. They can be used in um, like a Cayenne list is something that I've experimented with a lot, because in Cayenne you're kind of looking for something to do turns one and two. And turn one you can hide, turn two you can charge with your Crout Tox Rampagers, and turn three you can go off. So in that respect, they're really good in Cayenne. Um, Retaliation Cadre is tough. There's not a lot of points left over in Retaliation Cadre. In my view, you're going to be spending on your suits a lot. There's no real stratagems for them there. Again, they can be a distraction and kind of like something to blunt a charge from your opponent. You certainly can use them in that way, and they can always be used in that way. But they're not that great there. Monka, again, I'm not really into them for Monka because they're not helping me for the greater good. And you want to have as much for the greater good as possible those first three turns. And you don't want to have like some rampagers charging in there. Like you kind of want stuff to be guiding and shooting, because you only get like really up 2 turns, because turn one your opponent will usually hide on you if you're playing Monka. So they don't really work there. But in Cayenne, Auxilary Cadre, and in the Crew Hunting Pack, they're great. And the more I play with them, the better practiced I get with them, the more utility I'm getting out of them. And just today, they helped win a game for me against some Tyranids. So I really, I really enjoy the Crout Tox Rampagers, and the more I play with them, the more I enjoy them. So I'm going to put them in good in most attachments. Finally, here we have the Crew Carnivores, and Crew Carnivores are they're a good unit. They were great in ninth edition. They were really good meat shields. They're okay now. The stealth kind of helps keep them alive. If you can keep them in cover, their scout move is pretty good. They do sticky objectives. That's really cool. You can bring them in units of 20, which is fantastic. But, you know, they do have some downsides. They're not very survivable. They do definitely require some finesse in terms of your movement with them. The scout move's really important. I think that in like an auxiliary detachment, they're really good. I've heard very good things about the running 20, uh, 320 man blobs, and then bringing them off the board and back on, giving them deep strike, I believe, with the enhancement. They're a decent unit. They're a good screening unit. I really like them in the Retaliation Cadre. I've used them as a cheap screening unit there. Because they're only 65 points. You can get a lot of mileage out of them, especially out of a unit of 20 like that. That's a lot for your opponent to chew through, and you know they can do some work there. I mean, you can really hold down an objective with them. In the Kroot hunting pack, they're like a must. Like you have to have them. There's no other option there. Um, but they have a lot of play just as a cheap screening unit, um, that can hold its own against you know light infantry. Although I've seen them fold pretty easy to things, so they don't last long without help. But because they can see so much play and they're cheap and they're a great screening unit, I'm gonna put them in good in most detachments. You're probably not going to be leading them with a shaper all the time, outside of the Crew hunting pack and maybe the auxiliary cadre, but you could definitely find a lot of space in them. And I know a lot of people start, you know, every list with a unit or two of carnivores to just like, there's my meat shields, there's my screeners. So I get it there, I totally do. So this is the updated Tau Codex list. There's all the units there. I am not including the fortifications at this time, but maybe one day we'll have like a whole fortification tier list of all the armies that I cover here on the channel. But if you haven't, so please go ahead and subscribe. We're trying to get up to 500 subscribers, and we're getting there quick. We appreciate everybody tuning in lately. We're going to have a lot more coming, so please go ahead and like and leave a comment down. Let me know what you think about these updates. Let me know if there's any things that I missed, any things that I didn't pick up when I was doing this, and please come back for some more Wounded on Sixes.